I find it interesting and how fickle these headlines are nowadays, right? I need to remind myself that these people are really trying to sell clicks, and they're not really in the job of peddling the facts. And one of the facts that they won't peddle is, you know what, we're broke. As a country, we are broke. Now, whether you feel it or just content with the fact that we're $33 trillion in the hole, but we own the dollar printing press, that doesn't change the fact that we are flat out broke. Now, we literally are borrowing money by selling bonds so that we can give it away to other countries like, I don't know, Ukraine. In case you weren't counting, we're so broke that we just rolled out our 50th weapons package to Ukraine. 50th. And if that isn't the height of ridiculousness, we're so broke our legislators just gave themselves a pseudo $34,000 raise for managing the country's books so well. I can't say it without laughing. Now, it comes from a set-aside fund that allows members to dip into it to help them with costs of living in D.C. Things like meals and housing and like the inflation that they started, right? What a joke. Now, more than 200 lawmakers have reached into this fund, some of them millionaires. On both sides of the aisle are guilty. Now, my next guest will have an opinion or two on this, I'm sure. Please welcome into the show Rebecca Walser. Rebecca, thanks for playing along. This is idiotic. What do you think?
Oh, gosh. So the first thing is looking at this program is so what happened was the Democrats switched over to the Republicans with the changeover of leadership. They allowed for this per diem of food and housing, but it can't be used for a mortgage payment, Scott. So we're talking about $34,000. We did our research. The average house member makes $174,000. That's the average house member. So you're talking about over a 19.5% raise when you're adding $34,000 to the average congressional House member's salary of $174. But if you take this full 34, you're taking the full daily per diem on both the meal side and the housing allowance side. Why do we have members of Congress that are taking housing allowances that aren't in the form of mortgages? In other words, if I can go up there and rent an apartment and get a housing allowance because it's not a mortgage, then I'm going to take this $34,000 per diem. And when we look at the numbers, Scott, we see people like Matt Gaetz. You know, Matt Gaetz, I have the ultimate respect for him. He's a budget hawk. I would classify him as a budget hawk. I would classify him as somebody saying, no, we're not going to give money to Ukraine without actual deliverables being attached. No, we're not going to do. He was very big on not attaching Ukrainian additional aid to the Israeli aid package that we were trying to pass. We were wanting to do Israel only, and everyone else wanted to attach Ukraine. Again, as you mentioned, the 50th package. So he's somebody who I would consider a very stalwart budget hawk, and he is a participant in this program, which basically, Scott, says to me that there's no one left standing. I mean, granted, it is more expensive to live in Washington, D.C. I'm not denying that inflation has impacted the entire country and the entire globe. That's what happens when you print $20 trillion globally because you shut down your global economy voluntarily. But what I'm trying to say here, Scott, not so clearly, is if we have somebody like a Matt Gaetz who is also participating in a program that basically gives a 19% raise plus that was never publicly commented on, never talked about, never approved. The American people aren't getting a raise and they're not dealing with inflation. They're having to dip into their savings. They're having to use credit cards to pay the bills, to get the groceries for the kids' lunch. I mean, it's just not fair that they have this extra mechanism off book, off public comment, off public approval that they're doing, and that we have everybody participating in, including the most active stalwart budget hawks that don't like government money wasted.
Rules for thee and not for me once again. And I also think that if you dip into it, it should be a sign that you need to go because you have absolutely no clue about what the rest of the country is going through. Nobody else, not you nor I, have a chance to dip into a $34,000 fund because things are getting more expensive because of the actions that these lawmakers are taking still today by spending money that have put inflation where it's at. That's what's infuriating, that they're that out of touch that they still can do that and not think, you know what, it didn't hit any headlines. I mean, I don't think anybody else is really talking about it, but I was absolutely shocked to see that story because it's somehow been swept under the rug. And again, somehow they make it feel like that these people are deserved of it because they're somehow running the show. But when the issue is their problem, they did it to us too, but we don't have the fallback that they do.
The contract between the federal government and the American public is broken. We have a breakage of the social contract, and this is a problem because the social contract is what enables people to feel confident when they're paying taxes to their federal government. They say, this is a good deal because I'm getting military protection, I'm getting border protection, I'm getting FDA protection on my food and my water safety, I'm getting Department of Transportation making sure that the interstate system, I can travel from Virginia to Florida to Oregon if I want to on the federal highways. I'm getting all this for my dollar. And you know what? We're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing open borders. We're seeing the deterioration of our infrastructure back to the FDR and the New Deal and the Great Society programs of LBJ. Like, we have massive problems that we're not spending money here. You know, we have bridges collapsing and people dying because they are not being maintained. This has happened. I mean, if you look at the 60 Minutes they did on Pennsylvania and the systems around there that could collapse any moment, it's scary, Scott. We're not spending money that we desperately need to spend here on our borders, on our infrastructure, on our drug trafficking problem, and yet we've got Congress worried about getting a housing allowance and a per diem food credit because inflation is too expensive in D.C.
You have to laugh or you'd cry, and I'm going to sum it up with your words. You're exactly right. That social contract is not broken. It's shattered. And I appreciate you coming on and making sure we know about it. Thank you very much. Rebecca Walser, she comes to us from Tampa, Florida. Thanks, Rebecca. Love having you on. All right, by now you know I've got my go-tos. That's